Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be reading true Let's Not Meet horror stories. I hope you enjoy them. So, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories. Alright, so picture this. It was a Friday night, and my friend Sarah and I decided to check out this old abandoned amusement park on the outskirts of town. Back when we were kids, we used to hang out there, which made us think it would be a fun trip down memory lane. We returned home after spending the evening reminiscing and goofing around. The darkness outside was creeping me out as the sun had set. And then, out of nowhere, we saw this guy crouching by the road, staring at us as we drove past. It freaked us out big time. We continued driving, but when we glanced back, the man was gone. The tension in the car was so strong you could cut it with a knife. We were on edge, to put it mildly. At around 1 a.m., the wind was howling like crazy outside. Sarah and I were feeling hungry, so we made the decision to get a late-night snack. We headed to the car, which was parked near the woods. Not the most comfortable spot, let me tell you. As we approached the car, I swear I saw a shadowy figure lurking in the trees. Sarah freaked out and I screamed, causing us to both back away in panic. To make things even scarier, a peculiar car was parked near us, its headlights glaring at us like something out of a horror film. Even after calling my mom for reassurance, fear persisted. We sat in the car, observing as the mysterious vehicle recurred, sending chills down our spines. We were locked in that car for what felt like forever, and the tension increased every time the strange vehicle came back. When it finally disappeared, we took the initiative to investigate, driving around to see the license plate. After a night of fear and uncertainty, we decided to call it a night and go home. We were shaken by the events of that night. A reminder that darkness can be more than just the shadows. Several years ago, I got my first healthcare job as a psychiatric technician at this outpatient clinic. Psych techs have many different tasks. In that office, my role was like a medical assistant. I was excited to start my career in healthcare. I felt like I was contributing to something really meaningful. The team was all warm and welcoming. All the staff were really polite to each other and to patients. There was this one assistant, though, let's call him Tom, who was a little eccentric, but he was mostly polite. Nothing about him screamed danger or anything, but it just felt awkward with him. He had this habit of standing way too close when we talked. His gaze when we talked to you was seriously intense. It was like he was trying to read my mind or something. At one staff meeting, his stare was so distracting that I lost my train of thought. Our break room had this huge screen showing live footage from the security cameras around the clinic. We didn't record anyone's appointments, but we recorded everything else, like the waiting room, the little conference room, etc. One day, I saw Tom just hanging out in front of the screen, completely fixated on a patient in the waiting room. He wasn't just glancing, he was standing there paying really close attention. That patient was literally just sitting and waiting for his appointment. I asked if something was up with the patient, and Tom said something like, "No, I just find it interesting how to observe how they act when they think that no one is watching." That was a really weird thing to say. The longer I worked there, the more I noticed some concerning behaviors. He would linger around patient files way too long. Most healthcare providers had switched to electronic patient records. For some reason, that clinic did not switch. All of our records were still paper, and we kept them in a file room. Once, I caught him deep into the file of a patient who didn't even come to our clinic anymore. When I asked what he was working on, he just said, "Oh, just catching up on some old cases." One of our patients was a young, sweet woman, whom I will call Rachel. Rachel confided in me that she felt like someone was watching her all the time. It's super important to take those feelings seriously in our line of work and dig deeper instead of just brushing them off. Rachel mentioned that she thought that someone from the clinic might be keeping an eye on her outside of work. My heart sank when she said, "I think it's Tom." To be honest, if she had said anyone else's name, I might not have reacted differently. But when she said it was Tom, I instantly believed her. She hadn't seen anything super obvious, like a parked car outside or anything like that. But she had noticed Tom hanging around her apartment outside the complex sometimes. Like I said, hearing her say that she thought it was Tom made me trust her instincts. A few nights and days, I decided to test the water and casually asked him, "Hey Tom, what do you know about that patient Rachel?" His answer was uncomfortably detailed. He told me all this irrelevant information about Rachel's personal life, which had nothing to do with her treatment plan. Then he mentioned how Rachel had canceled her last appointment, not because she was busy, but because she went out for lunch with friends instead. He saw it on Instagram and calculated what time it must have been. He talked about it so casually that it felt like monitoring her personal life was just a normal part of the job. I didn't know what to say. His idea of professional boundaries was so different from mine that if I told him he was being inappropriate, I didn't think he would agree. The next day, I brought this up with another one of my coworkers, whom I'll call Sarah. Sarah said something like, "Yeah, I've heard the rumors. Some patients have mentioned seeing him outside the clinic." It felt like everyone had sensed something was off about Tom, but no one had taken any real action yet. Then, one chaotic day while trying to catch up on documentation, I asked Tom if he had a spare notebook. He handed me one. I don't know if it was a notebook that Tom meant to keep to himself, but it wasn't empty at all. It was filled with detailed notes about patients, what they wore, their addresses, their departure times from the clinic. Way too much information. And there was even a section dedicated to Rachel with all these little details about her coffee preferences and jogging schedule. I immediately reported that notebook to our supervisor, who promised to look into it. But nothing happened after that. I ended up quitting and finding a different job. I could not stay in an environment that allowed his behavior. At the time of writing this, the story that happened to me was 5 days ago. It was on a Saturday, and for context, I'm a 16-year-old French boy. So I was with my friend this Saturday in my little French hometown, casually hanging out at the border of the town for a whole hour. My friend here is a 17-year-old girl. We were sitting on big rocks behind the kindergarten school of our town, right in front of the beet field at around 8 p.m. The sky was starting to turn dark. Nothing has ever really happened in our town since we live in it, except recently, when a dad stabbed his daughter and wife 40 times. But it has nothing to do with my story. Note that there aren't many foreigners there since it's kind of a lost country town close to Paris. So I was sitting with my friend eating stuff like we casually do when we hang out, when suddenly, I spot a man with a beanie. He had his hands in his sweatshirt and was directly walking towards us. He was way too close for my friend and me to get up and walk away. He comes right in front of us and starts talking English. My friend doesn't speak English, so she didn't really know what was happening at this time. So this guy comes right in front of me when he noticed that I was able to speak English and tries to shake my hand, which I deny the approach. Note that he didn't look like he was drunk or under drugs. The weird guy starts talking to me, and he points out the field that was behind my back, which means that if I wanted to look at it, I would have needed to turn back to him. And then he says very insistently, "Is that cabbage?" I responded yes, but he wasn't satisfied by my response, since he was trying to get me to look behind me. However, There was literally the other part of the field that was in my line of sight at my left. He tried to get me to look again and again, which was kind of stressing because this guy was at like less than a meter away from me, which means that he could have done anything that he wanted to me. Then he told me some incoherent stuff like my driver told me there was cabbage, or I asked people they didn't understand. Right after saying that, he pats my shoulder, goes behind me and crouches at the border of the field. He tells me to come see if it was cabbage when I clearly told him many times that it was cabbage, even though it was not. I was just trying to get rid of this creep, but it kind of looked like cabbage. Right when I see that I'm out of his range, I say to my friend to take her bag and start running. At first, she thought I was joking, but when she saw me running, she changed her mind. We were like 20 meters away from him, and he started walking towards us but rapidly disappeared behind the kindergarten school. My friend and I were both really unsettled and quickly wanted to go home. We said goodbye to each other, and we split in two different directions. I needed to go by the elementary school that was right next to the kindergarten school to get home. Suddenly, I see this creep coming from the road that was between the field and the kindergarten school, with his phone on and in his hands. I quickly turned around and went at my friend's house with her, waiting for his father to drive me home. Later that night, my friend and I were talking, and we suggested that it may be someone kidnapping or organ trafficking stuff, since it was the first time we saw an alone foreigner that didn't speak a single word in French. The fact that he got up and escaped quickly when we started running hinted me on the fact that it was just some pretext to get me to move away from my friend. Maybe he had texted some guy waiting in a car for them to kidnap me or my friend, since the creep was clearly trying to make us lose time with the cabbage thing. Later that night, I told what happened to a friend that lives in the same town as us, and he told us that this guy was hanging around the town with a weird behavior that day as well. We were really unsettled and scared after that event, but now we're completely good, and I'm wondering if we're doing too much about this guy even though my intuition really told me to get away from him. If anyone has anything to say to help us clear this up, or if anyone knows any known cases, or maybe this has happened to someone else, please let me know. But to the creep that made me feel like I was being trapped in a horror movie, let's not meet again. Last year, I started law school in Los Angeles. I have never lived in a big city before, and I was really excited to be in a massive city with over 4 million people. Ever since I was little, I always knew I had a half-sister in LA, but my parents had this weird anger towards her that always made it feel like a taboo topic. Of course, I had looked her up on social media, and I knew what she looked like, but that was about it. We had never actually met. She was never that active on social media, so there wasn't a lot that I could see. Out of nowhere, one day in my first year of law school, I got a friend request on Facebook from my sister. Her profile seemed legitimate. She had Facebook friends, and her profile picture looked like her. She sent me a message, inviting me to a little dinner party at the park with her friends. We could finally meet each other for the first time. I was new to LA, still am, and I had no idea which parts of the city to avoid at night. I was so excited about the idea, but I had a lot of anxiety about it too. It would be nice if we met, totally clicked, and became besties for life. But what if we ended up sobbing like we were in some dramatic movie scene? What if I tried to talk to her and she just didn't click with me, and she started showing me an attitude? Or worse, what if it's all going well until we have some kind of disagreement? Someone said something hurtful, and then we were both crying in front of everyone. Honestly, if she had suggested a cozy little bakery for desserts instead, I would have gone. But going to a park with other people didn't feel right. I thought it was like such a precious moment that I didn't want to have it in front of all of these other people. I couldn't bring myself to go. I didn't want to risk having a meltdown in front of other people. I was worried about how messy it could get. A few weeks later, I Googled that park to see what it was like. Maybe we could meet up there together, just one-on-one. That's when I learned that something was wrong. I won't say the name of the park, but anyone who has lived in LA for a long will tell you that it's not a safe place for girls to be having a dinner party at night. The area surrounding that park has very high violent crime rates. It's controlled by gangs. Even people who do illegal business in that park are forced to pay a tax to the gang in exchange for being left alone. So now I was really concerned and curious. I actually tried to get a hold of my sister myself. She was an undergrad at the time, at a local college. I had a friend who went to her school. I asked my friend to reach out to her on campus and ask her if she'd be okay with meeting us. They connected, and the three of us met at my friend's house. It was great. We got along so well. My friend was also very happy to do that for us. The three of us had so much fun. We weren't bursting in tears, but we let out a few. We had dinner, we watched a movie, and we spent the night at my friend's house. When I told my sister about that whole thing, she said that she hadn't used Facebook since high school, so clearly someone was impersonating her. I would have told her to report the fake account, but it had already been deleted. She knew that she had been impersonated on social media, though. Another one of her friends had been scammed by someone pretending to be her. It was some scheme involving fake concert tickets or something like that. Someone had been impersonating my sister. They knew that I was in town, and they literally tried to lure me into one of the most dangerous parts of LA at night. I have no idea what their motives were. I don't know if I even want to find out. Meeting my sister after all of these years was a beautiful thing, but the whole backdrop was terrifying. This happened 4 years back. It was the middle of winter, and the night was unseasonably warm, without a hint snow on the ground. I left my apartment around 8 p.m. to go for my daily walk. I worked nights and my schedule was screwed up, hence the 8 p.m. walk, figuring I would cross the bridge into the city nearby. For further context, I'm a tall guy who's fairly athletic, and I was in my late 20s at the time. I'd rarely had a problem walking at night, and at the time, I felt safe to do so. I put on my headphones and headed towards the bridge. The first 20 minutes were uneventful. I passed by old houses, a subpar Mexican restaurant, a really good Mexican restaurant, a sketchy gas station, some newly built upscale apartments, and finally, I was at the river, enjoying the view of the bright lights over the dark flowing water, not yet frozen. I crossed the bridge into the city and hit a crosswalk button at a four-way intersection, then noticed someone standing on the corner opposite, the only other soul I'd seen outside that night. Seemingly, she was doing nothing, and I assumed she was waiting for an Uber to come pick her up, since she didn't seem to be waiting for the light to change. The street, ordinarily busy during the daytime, was silent. The light changed, and I crossed, headed in her direction. As I neared her, I noticed that she would cast glances in my direction, then look away, almost sheepishly. She did this multiple times, and I figured she was unnerved by me. I sympathized, figuring it must have made her uneasy, us being the only two people on a dimly lit street. As I passed by, I took in her outfit, mostly because I thought she looked cold. She wore a knitted hat with tassels, a sweater that looked too thin for the winter, tight jeans, and a little plastic children's backpack on her back. I thought she was in her teens at first, but upon closer inspection, she appeared to be in her late 20s or 30s. She had short, cropped light brown hair and a pale complexion. She was skinny and was of average height. I was maybe a head taller than her. I walked by and continued down the street. I passed by high-rise hotels on my right and left, and made my way into a central park. During peak hours, this place would be packed with tourists and locals alike. But that day, at an odd hour, and with the pandemic in full swing, I felt like the only man in the city. I admired the brilliant display of lighted trees as I crossed through the center of the park. Then, figuring I was at a good halfway point in my journey, I made my way around an old marble and stone library. back towards the bridge. As I turned the corner of the library back onto the street from which I'd come, I nearly collided with someone, moving towards me. It was the same woman I'd seen not 10 minutes earlier. My noise-canceling headphones were still on, so I pulled down one side and said something by way of apology. She said nothing in return. Instead, she stepped back from me and stood below a streetlight, not making eye contact. She stole tiny glances at me, that same tick I'd noticed before. I put my headphones back on, nodded a good night, and headed towards the nearest crosswalk. Reason told me that she must be headed in the direction I'd come from, since we'd nearly run into each other headed opposite ways. But some part of me whispered that she wasn't headed that way. Sure enough, when I turned to look, she was trailing close behind me, her strides surprisingly long and energetic. I found this odd enough that I continued to watch her out of the corner of my eye. Shortly after I reached the crosswalk, as I stood there waiting for the light to change, she caught up with me, passed me by, and stopped. A car went past, and as it did so, she squatted over her plastic bag a few meters from me, rifling frantically for something, looking up at me on occasion. I hit a button on my headphones, stopping my podcast so that I could hear her better. What I found disturbing about the motion of her looking through her bag is that it struck me as fake, as though she were pretending for some reason. She was barely looking inside, and her careless motions struck more like bad acting. Something about her motions, the way she kept looking at me, felt wrong. The light changed, and I began to walk quickly, but she was faster. She stood suddenly, darting past me towards the museum, swinging the half-open little pink backpack over her shoulder. I watched her silhouette disappear into the darkness beyond the reach of the streetlights. I hoped that that was the end of that, and after a few beats of not seeing her, I let my guard fall a little, restarting my podcast. Beyond the museum was a patch of poorly lit sidewalk, in front of a squat building with mirror-like windows. I wasn't far from the bridge now. As I made my way back there, I turned my head to look at the reflections of buildings and streetlights in the windows. To my horror, a dark figure sprinted silently towards my reflection, dreamlike. I'm not sure why, maybe out of sheer confusion, but I turned to meet her as she hurtled towards me. Perhaps surprised by my sudden turn, she halted mere feet from me, staring. Her eyes were wide and looked frantic, wild. She kept looking at my arms, then back at my face as though sizing me up. My accidental bluff had worked, and in the darkness, I suppose I must have looked more prepared to fight back than I felt. She gripped something small tightly in one hand, though she held it off to the side, and in the shadow of the building I couldn't see what it was. Seconds dragged as we stood there, staring at one another. Immobilized by fear and confusion, I waited for her to make some move, to attempt to use whatever object she held in her hand. Just then, to my enormous relief, a car trundled slowly past. A bit of my strength returned, and over my blaring podcast I felt more than heard myself shouting at her, "What do you want?" No reply. I slowly backed away from her, expecting her to move. She just watched me, that same intense look on her face. I took another step back, then another, steadily backing away from her until I felt confident enough to turn and carefully walk away. As I reached a better lit area, I began to move faster, all the while keeping my eyes trained on her shadowy form. She stood there for some time, statuesque. Then abruptly, having spontaneously abandoned whatever plans she may have had for me, she turned from me, and without looking for traffic, she crossed the street with long strides and disappeared around the corner of a building. Something about the casual air of it disturbed me. I kept my eyes trained behind me on my walk home, afraid that she would follow me. The bridge was well lit, and I saw no sign of her. Knowing that this was the only way for her to follow me and keep up on foot, I breathed a sigh of relief. I saw no more cars headed from the city, no more pedestrians out walking. Nothing happened after that. I'm not sure why, but I didn't call the cops that night. I still regret having not called, despite my roommates insisting I do so. I just remembering thinking that I wasn't sure what to say to the cops. that I hadn't really been attacked, that they wouldn't be able to find her anyway. I made up excuses. I suppose I must have been in shock, in denial at having been nearly ambushed, especially by someone smaller than me, in my own city, so close to my apartment. One of my roommates called the cops for me. A cop drove through the area, but by that point she was gone. Woman with the little pink backpack. Let's not meet again. This happened a few hours ago, and I'm not scared anymore, just angry that my pizza got stolen. In my town, there's a story that a guy has moved into the deep woods close to our town. I never believed it, as I go for night drives occasionally and never saw him or anything resembling a man that lives in the woods. Anyway, tonight, I decided to go for a drive and drove past a pizza place. Being hungry, I decided to get a pizza before I went home. In my head, I had a plan to eat the pizza and play some Minecraft, as I'm in my 2-week Minecraft phase at the moment. I paid for my pizza and started walking to my car with the pizza in one hand and my phone in the other, messaging my friend, asking if he wants to play some Minecraft when I get home. I look up from my phone to cross the road to the car park, and I see something under my car. It looks like a shadow or something dark. I put my phone in my pocket and pull out the keys. I unlock my car to scare off anything close to the car. I was thinking it may be a cat or a dog just hanging around my car. But when I unlock the car, nothing happens. No cat running away, and nobody running away. The shadow looked like it was cast from the driver's side, so I was gonna have a look to see what it was, and whether I wanted or not to get in. I put my keys away and pull out my phone again, and turn the flashlight on to see better in the dark. As I turn towards the driver's side of my car, I see him. A dirty, naked guy with big eyes staring right at me. He was crouched down, trying to hide from me. Now, I usually don't get scared of anything, but this guy scared me. He looked like he rolled around in mud, and it dried out on his skin. His eyes looked creepy, bloodshot, and kind of bulging out of his head, and he was naked. I get startled and jump backwards out of instinct, dropping my pizza in the process. It falls out of his box and onto the floor. I start moving back slowly and shout at him to get away from my car. He looks up at me, then at the pizza, then back at me again. He tilts his head to one side and then jumps towards the pizza like a dog, grabs it and starts running away down the road, and I assume he ran all the way to the woods. I wouldn't know where he went as I didn't feel like following him. I lock my car and run back to the pizza place and stay there for a bit. The workers obviously don't believe me when I tell them what happened, but I know what I saw. Once the fear subsides after a while, I realize that this guy just stole my pizza. Angry as I was looking forward to it, I decide to get another one and run to my car this time. I get in, put the pizza on the passenger seat and go home. Once I got home, I locked all my doors and windows. I even locked my bedroom door as I feel a little bit scared still. I think I'll be playing Minecraft until the sun comes up. Creepy, dirty guy that lives in the woods close to my town, I never want to see you again, because I may have to fight you for stealing my pizza. I posted here before about one of my creepy encounters with men and got some good feedback, so I thought I'd share another experience after it came up in conversation today. This experience occurred several months after the other, and it was the remaining paranoia from it that helped me realize what was happening, and very well may have saved my life. I was 18 at the time, although commonly mistaken for being in my early teens, and had just finished some errands in town, and decided to take a shortcut to catch the bus home, said shortcut being a narrow street. One of the shopping center's entrances opened onto. It was honestly more of a glorified alleyway, but since the street connected onto the high street and it was the quickest way into the shopping center, It usually got a decent amount of foot traffic and was extremely safe to use. However, depending on the time of day, there may only be very few, if any, people there. And that was the case on this day. Just as I was walking out of the entrance and celebrating the fact that it wasn't blocked by people standing around talking as usual, a young man around my age startled me by stepping out of a small alcove beside the door and blocking my path with an, "Oh, hi there. How are you? Have you been shopping?" The way he had approached me immediately put me off, but the overly familiar fancy seeing you here sort of tone he was using made me hesitate for a moment, wondering if he was just someone from high school who recognized me and wanted to say hello. So I muttered, yeah, hi," to stall for a moment while I racked my brain for who he could be. It didn't take me long to confirm I didn't know a good-looking, fit, blonde 20-something with bright blue eyes and a heavy accent. And since I couldn't think of a good reason someone like that would approach me, my socially awkward, non-confrontational past self decided the best way to deal with the situation was just to dodge around him and leave. He didn't let me, though. Instead of taking the hint, he immediately started walking in stride with me on the side of the street closest to the road, so that I was between him and the side of the building. And when I tried to speed up because I didn't like the feeling of being penned in, he sped up along with me, keeping me between him and the wall. As off-putting as that already was, he began asking me questions that seemed innocent enough, but all centered around where I was headed, and if anyone was going to be waiting for me there. "Where are you going now? Have you not finished your shopping? Are you meeting your friends? Maybe I could come with you. Or are you meeting your family instead? Do you have a boyfriend? Is he who you're meeting? Are you going home? Do you live near here, or are you getting a bus?" I had already asked him to leave me alone once, and he acted like I hadn't even said anything, so I was ignoring his questions and glancing around, desperately hoping someone else would enter the street with us in case he didn't react well to being asked a second time. And that is why I noticed the second man. He was older, in his late 30s or early 40s, with dark hair, a short but scruffy beard, and had the kind of face and expression that tells you that you might need to be cautious when dealing with this person. I have no idea where he had come from. My guess is he was hiding in the alcove on the other side of the door from the blonde, or further down that side of the street out of sight. But he was now walking in line with us on the opposite side of the road, staring the entire time. I tried not to let either of the men realize I had seen him while my brain went into overdrive, trying to figure out what their endgame was. Were they going to assault me? Surely they wouldn't risk being caught doing that in broad daylight, right outside a shopping center. Maybe they were just going to rob me. But if they wanted to do that, the blonde could have just grabbed my bag and ran when he had the element of surprise, back when he was hiding behind the door. Then I remembered something that made my blood run cold. At the end of the street was an underground parking garage, the entrance of which opened up onto the pavement. Me and the blonde were walking on, and I would have to walk right past it because of the way he was penning me in towards the wall. It would take him barely any effort to shove me through it, and the dark-haired man across the street had been toying with something in his pocket that I worried at first was a weapon. But what if it was car keys? What if they were planning to drag me in there and into a car, take me who knows where, and do who knows what to me? We were very close to the end of the street now, so I abruptly dropped back behind the blonde and darted towards the road, wanting to get away from the garage and make a beeline for the end of the street without getting within arm's reach of the dark-haired man. The blonde immediately darted after me and blocked my path, hurting me back towards the pavement and pinning me in so close to the wall this time that my arm was almost scraping across it as I walked, all while still talking to me casually, as if he wasn't doing anything wrong. They obviously knew the game was up at this point, though, and when I glanced over at the dark-haired man to check where he was, he locked eyes with me, laughed, and called out to the blonde in a different language. The best I was able to determine later was it was Eastern European, but not Lithuanian, Polish, Romanian, or Russian, saying something that made him laugh too, and doubled down on his "is anyone going to miss you" questions, while also asking me if I had ever had a boyfriend, if I had ever kissed a boy, would I like him to be my boyfriend, etc. Obviously, I continued to ignore them and was panicking more and more as we approached the garage. But fortunately for me, the dark-haired man started to lose his patience with the blonde's lack of progress with me and began snapping at him, presumably demanding he get me to answer because the blonde looked worried and his tone was getting more urgent every time the man spoke to him. Only a few feet from the garage, the dark-haired man apparently crossed a line because the blonde suddenly looked furious, stopped walking, span around and started shouting back at him. I immediately took the opportunity to bolt for the end of the street, and although I heard the blonde shout, "Hey, where are you going?" and what I assume was both of them running behind me, I managed to round the corner and lost them by ducking down the next street, and then several more just to be safe. I didn't feel safe enough to go to my original bus stop in case they stayed in the area and saw me, so I headed for one several blocks away instead, on edge and jumping at the slightest thing until I was on the bus and headed home. Although I tried to report the incident to the police, they weren't particularly interested since neither of the men had actually put their hands on me, and I had no proof of what I assumed they were planning to do to me. I never heard about any abductions, assaults, or robberies in that area, so I'm hoping they simply gave up after the plan didn't work with me. I'm glad I was paranoid enough to save myself from that situation, but do worry sometimes that another girl wasn't as lucky. Nine years ago, I had met a person that to this day, I still wish I never did. I was an isolated, bullied, and depressed 8th grader, with the added state of being a plus-sized kid in a sports-centric town. So basically, I was beaten and ridiculed on a daily basis. I couldn't make any friends with my new classmates. All of my old friends from elementary school I got placed in different classes, and nobody was in the same after-school groups as me anymore. We were also all in a scout group, but that disbanded before I got into middle school. I was also lonely that if someone talked to me without picking on me, it made me happy. I had a Google Plus account, the only social media I could access at school, that I kept hidden from my parents, that I would use to check out my favorite fandoms, and hopefully use to make some new friends. One day I was on Google Plus in the computer lab, and I had commented under a piece of fan art of a character I liked. The person who made the post had replied to me not even a minute later. I remember getting very excited seeing that notification, my heart swelling up in excitement. The two of us spent the next 10 minutes of my class talking to each other in the comments section. We ended up replying so much, we flooded a good portion of the comments with our talk. After I had to change classes, I logged back in on one of the Chrome books we had stored in the back of the class, and saw that she actually messaged me. Her name was Haley. At least, she told me that was her name. But years later, I'm not as sure it was actually her name. In the message I got, Haley told me she was 2 years older than me, and that we had a lot of things in common. I spent the rest of the school day on my phone, not caring about anything in my classes. We talked for the next week in our direct messages, until she suggested that we message each other in a private chat room. Later that day, we made a private chat on an online messaging site, and in our first conversation, we at first talked on messages. Then Haley asked if we could also do a voice call. I told her I wasn't sure, but she told me it was only to better hold a conversation with me, and eventually, after she asked me multiple times, I gave in. After an hour of us talking, she then suggested we video chat. I agreed, both to make sure she was actually my age, but also to put a name to a face. Haley turned on her camera and she did look in the same age range as me. I don't know why, but that fact haunts me more than anything else. The fact that she looked so close to my age, plus that she easily smiled and spoke so friendly to me, made me feel that I had nothing to be afraid of. So that led to me quickly believe that I could trust her. We ended up talking for hours after, with me practically on cloud 9 the entire time. In the beginning of our little friendship, things were going all right. We told each other about our schools, what we liked, and gushing over our favorite series we liked. We talked almost every day and stayed up late talking nearly all night. We even exchanged a couple of silly pictures of ourselves and memes back and forth a lot. After we had been talking for 6 months, Haley asked me if I would like to meet her friends. At first I was ecstatic, and the thought of having more friends made me so excited I didn't think twice before saying yes. Haley invites me in, and I got to meet her other friends. I had a completely different feeling about these people compared to what I felt with Haley. Something made me feel unsafe in that chat room, even though they all seemed nice, and that Haley reassured me I could trust them. It felt like my instincts were trying to warn me, but I wasn't sure about what, so I ignored it. Most of them were much older than me. In a chat with her main friends, there were 6 other people. Most of them were 18 or 19, but there were 2 guys that I distinctly remember being in their 20s. I asked how they all met, and they told me they all met either on another social media site or from real life, but wouldn't answer any more of my questions. I was a bit naive, so all of the red flags that were popping up went completely over my head. From constant loud talking to frequently overlapping each other, the calls I were on with them were pure chaos. The messages were even worse, because they would frequently drop cuss words and topics that should not be brought up with someone who was still a minor. I tried building genuine connections with them, but they all acted dismissive to me and acted like I was annoying whenever I tried to talk in a conversation. Needless to say, I did not like them very much. Haley, on the other hand, was all about them. She would pull the exact same habits, jokes, dirty words, and all of that with the others. They could say something super problematic, but she would be laughing right along with them. I was shocked by this version of Haley, because she never acted like this with me when it was just the 2 of us. We still talked a bunch, but slowly she was talking to her other friends more than she was with me. At first I thought it was fine, but the more she ignored my messages or didn't pick up my calls, the more I got bothered. When I called to confront Haley about blowing me off, she went ballistic on me, saying that I was being selfish and that I didn't want her to talk to her other friends because I was jealous. I explained that wasn't true, but she wouldn't listen and then hung up on me. Haley then ghosted me for almost a month, leaving me worried and upset over what happened. When she started talking to me again, I was so emotionally distraught. I was crying on our first call and apologizing for what I said the last time we talked. She told me it was fine. She just needed some time alone, and that she would talk to me a bit more. And indeed she did, although not what I thought she would. Haley began to tell me she had depression, and that was the reason she wouldn't talk to me for a month. I didn't judge her about it, and said whatever she needed to talk about she could come to me. This led to her trauma dumping on me nearly every day, talking about how crappy her home life was, and how bad her relationship was with her mom, and how much she hated herself. I was there to offer an ear and some kind words whenever Haley called or messaged me about it. This quickly became part of our routine. Almost daily, in the middle of us having any kind of conversation, she'd begin complaining about anything happening during her day. If not that, it would be about how ugly she thought she was, or how much her life sucked and wanted to end things. The last one freaked me out the most. I was worried about her because we lived in different states, and I couldn't help her in person. Every time she would become self-deprecating, I would say otherwise, giving her compliments and words of affirmation. For so long, my throat ached and felt raw. And then, just as fast as she'd bring it up, she dropped that conversation, and we talked like we were before. Haley also began calling for long periods of time and messaging me late into the night. Phone calls would stretch for hours at a time, and her texts would come in until 3 or 4 in the morning. The thing was, it was mainly her talking now. Every phone call she'd take over the conversation. If I didn't message her back quickly enough, she'd spam multiple texts back to back faster than I can read them. I would try to end them myself, but every time I would try, Haley would chastise me for wanting to leave our conversation, when not long ago I wanted to have her attention. She basically guilt-tripped me back into talking to her, and it worked. Even if I had lost interest in our talks, or didn't want her to message me during class, I would still let her talk and reply. At least I still had her attention, and she still wanted to talk to me. This all went on in a cycle for 2 years, and it left me feeling more anxious and exhausted than anything else ever did. It felt like we had nothing in common anymore, and she either ghosts me for a week or spends the entire weekend texting me nonstop. The topics of her self-worth have also gotten worse. They escalated to her messaging me goodbye or, "I can't live like this anymore," without responding to any of my following messages or calls. Alongside of that, she would send me pictures of her, marking herself, telling me about how it felt to do it. The sight of those messages would send me into panic attacks, and every time I would panic and message her after, I would be sent into tears. Not only that, the group chat with her other friends got worse. Arguments broke out frequently. Drama and gossip spread like an oil spill, and it led to people being blocked and unblocked almost every few days. I hated talking to them. They began ganging up on me in messages, and Haley was often the first one to make rude jokes about me that they would all laugh at. I began getting sick of it, and would stop messaging and calling both Haley and her friends, despite her begging me to. One late night, while the group was in an argument over text, I hit my breaking point. I was tired of all the drama and them treating me like crap all the time, so I messaged the group chat that I had enough of them, and privately messaged Haley that I needed a break. Then I left both chat rooms, blocked everyone I talked to, deleted my messaging account, and deleted the site from my computer's history. Once it was all over, I felt like I had been freed from some kind of prison, and all I could do was cry in relief and euphoria over the whole thing being over. I later found out that all of the pictures Haley had sent me were all stock images and photoshopped. I also found out from a bit of digging through her background, a lot of things didn't add up. I learned that she was actually a lot older than what she originally told me, at least 6 years older than me, meaning that when we first met when I was 14, she was about 20 years old. Many things from our interactions still haunt me, especially the picture of her marks and her scathing, self-deprecating messages. For almost 3 months, I would have nightmares about Haley getting back in contact with me and what she would say or do to me. I have many better friends now, and I am absolutely certain I will never have to hear from Haley again. But sometimes, I still wonder who that woman really was, and what was it about me that she was interested in. Hopefully I won't ever find out. So to Haley, if you somehow ever find this story, let's not meet again. Edit. For clarification, and the fact I got tired of explaining it in the comment section, the pictures she would send me when we would message each other were all pictures of her friends and family, places she claimed to have been to, and items she owned. A few weeks after I blocked Haley, I found them stored on my computer. I got curious, so I reversed image searched the pictures she sent me, and they were all stock photos. Every result I found from her picture led back to a stock photo site, with the only difference between them being that she cropped out the logo of the site from the pictures. Basically, I was lied to. A lot. I matched with a man on Tinder one day. The conversation got spicy and I gave him my number so that we can continue chatting. We texted that night. We never exchanged photos or anything like that. Never made plans to meet up. The conversation died and I forgot about him. Weeks go by and I deleted the conversation. Then late one night I get a lewd photo of a man that I don't recognize. I think of insulting them but decide to just delete it and not respond. A few weeks later I get another one. I have the idea to check my deleted messages to make sure that I don't know them. Sure enough, I find out that it's the Tinder guy. It's really weird of him to text me a month later just lewd images after no contact or anything for over a month. Ew. So I blocked him. A couple weeks later, I get a lewd video on my Apple Watch. It's the same guy. I'm not sure how I got the message on my watch if I already blocked his number. I block him again on my watch. What a weirdo, I think. A week later, I leave my apartment to go on a walk. I see him. He is right there in front of my apartment, walking towards me. He has the same outfit as his profile photos and same tattoos and hat, so I'm certain that it was him. I never mentioned where I live. I'm freaked out, but I'm dressed in baggy clothes and recently changed up my hair color so I can keep my head down in hopes that he doesn't recognize me. I walk right past him. I was too scared to look at him to see his reaction if he recognized me. I was too scared to look back in his direction to see where he went, so I just kept walking forward. I was severely freaked out, but nothing else happened after that and I never saw him again. I never mentioned where I lived, so my only thought is that he must have used my phone number to look me up. It was the least likely person I would have expected, just some random person I messaged for only one day on Tinder. Even with the lewd content they sent, I still just thought that they were a regular perv. I never expected them to somehow show up at my apartment. They didn't even text a word to me or attempt to meet up. They just sent lewds over 2 months and then appeared. It's just so random and weird. I think their motive was definitely something sexually perverted. It gives me creeps to think about what they wanted, but I'm glad they left me alone. I never give out my real phone number to dates anymore. It's my day off, and my husband is traveling for work. I had just come upstairs after a run on our treadmill, which we keep on the ground floor where the garage is. I came upstairs and was about to hop in the shower, but on my way up I saw these 2 plastic skeletons that I'd bought for Halloween. The plan was to bring them up on the awning so it looked like they were sitting on our front balcony. It's a bit dirty, but I decided to set them up before I got in the shower. So I was outside in my sports bra and leggings only. I had to bring a chair from the dining room outside so I could reach the top of the awning. There are hooks for hanging plants up there, so I was using said hooks to hang the skeletons. The door to my house was ajar while doing this. I was done hanging them and adjusting their poses when a woman came running up the stairs to our front door. To be honest, I was so startled that there was a random woman on my porch that when she said, "I'm dying of thirst, I'm so thirsty, can I have some water?" I just went inside and grabbed a water bottle. We recently had a box of bottled waters delivered, so they were just inside the foyer. This woman followed me inside and I started to panic as I realized that I was now inside my house with a strange woman. There's a lot of homeless people and junkies in the neighborhood, but she was well dressed. Besides that, she was wearing a wool pea coat in 80-degree weather, which is odd, and clean. I'm a small person, and she was probably a head taller than me and outweighed me by 30+ pounds. She chugged the water bottle and started chatting with me as if we were old friends. She asked how long I'd had the house and where my parents were. I'm over 30, so it was a weird question. I told her my parents had never lived here, and then said, "I have to leave soon, so you'd better get going," and literally shoved her out the door. I texted my husband who is overseas and could see on the Ring camera that she left the property. He kept asking why I let her in. Honestly, I'm not sure why I did, but I also really didn't expect her to follow me inside. So, strange woman from the sidewalk who came inside my house, let's not meet again. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I also hope that you enjoy the extra rain at the end. Get a good night's sleep, everyone, and I'll read to you in the next video. Bye-bye now.